For 19 years, Seth Curry kept a secret about his brother Steph that could have completely changed the history of basketball. A secret so profound that not even his own parents knew the truth behind the meteoric rise of one of the NBA's greatest stars. When Seth finally decided to reveal what happened that night in 2004, the entire Curry family was left in absolute shock. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see the Curry dynasty in basketball. Ethiopia's house in Oakland was filled with the familiar aroma of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes seasoned with cinnamon. It was Thanksgiving 2023, and the Curry family had gathered as they had for decades, maintaining alive a tradition that not even the relentless demands of the NBA could break. The mahogany dining room table comfortably seated 8 people, but that night, only 6 chairs were occupied. Steph Curry adjusted his casual navy blue shirt while cutting small pieces of turkey for his children, Riley and Ryan, who chattered animatedly about school. Isha smiled while serving more cranberry sauce, her golden earrings catching the soft light from the chandelier. Across the table, Seth Curry observed the scene with a look that Dell, his father, had begun to notice in recent weeks, a mixture of contemplation and restlessness that didn't match his normally carefree son. "Seth, you've barely touched your food," commented Sonia Curry, her voice carrying that maternal concern that never disappears, no matter how old the children are. "Is everything all right, honey?" Seth raised his eyes from his plate, meeting his mother's caring gaze. At 33 years old, he had developed the same confident posture that characterized all the Curry men. But in that moment, something in his expression reminded them of the shy teenager who used to hide behind his younger brother during interviews. "Actually, Mom," Seth paused, placing his fork carefully beside his plate. The metallic sound against the porcelain seemed to echo louder than it should have. "There's something I need to talk to you all about. Something that I've been keeping for a very long time." The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Steph stopped cutting food for the children, his golden eyes, identical to his brother's, focusing completely on Seth. Dell leaned slightly forward, his hands intertwined on the table, while Sonia felt her stomach tighten with that maternal intuition that always anticipated important moments. "Like, how long are we talking here?" Steph asked, trying to maintain a casual tone, but his voice betrayed growing concern. Seth took a deep breath, the air seeming heavy in his lungs. He looked around the table, memorizing each face, each expression, knowing this would be the last moment before everything changed. 19 years, he said finally, his voice low but clear. "Since when you were 16 and I was 14. The silence that followed was different from any quietude that House had ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a satisfied family after a meal, nor the natural pause between conversations. It was the kind of silence that precedes revelations that redefine relationships. Isha instinctively pulled Riley and Ryan closer, her maternal instincts activated even without fully understanding what was happening. The children, sensing the change in the adult's mood, stopped chattering and looked curiously at Uncle Seth. 19 years? Dell repeated, his deep voice carrying decades of experience as a father and former professional athlete. He had been through difficult situations, complicated conversations, pressure moments in packed arenas, but something in Seth's expression warned him this would be different. Seth nodded slowly. "I know this is going to sound strange, and I know you're all going to wonder why I waited so long, but there are some things that happened when we were teenagers, things that completely changed how I saw our family, our situation, and especially," he looked directly at Steph, how I saw my role as your older brother." Steph felt his heart accelerate. He and Seth had always been close, despite the natural competition that existed between athletic brothers. They had shared rooms, dreams, disappointments, and victories. The idea that Seth had kept something significant for almost 2 decades was both disturbing and intriguing. "Seth," Sonia said softly, extending her hand across the table to touch her son's. "Whatever it is, we'll understand. You're our son, and there's nothing that can change that." Seth's eyes glistened with an emotion he had kept repressed for a long time. "I know, Mom. You've always been incredible to me, to all of us. Maybe that's exactly why it was so hard to talk about this. Because what I did, the decision I made back then, was thinking about protecting our family, about protecting Steph." "Protecting me from what?" Steph asked, his voice now loaded with urgency. "Seth, man, what are we talking about here?" Seth closed his eyes for a moment, gathering courage. When he opened them again, there was a determination that hadn't been there before. "Do you remember when you all used to say we were lucky to have so much natural talent for basketball? That it was like a family gift?" Everyone around the table nodded. It was a familiar conversation, part of the Curry mythology that had been repeated in countless interviews and documentaries. "Well," Seth continued, his voice now firmer, "the truth is that not everything was luck or natural talent. And the reason I never told this before," he paused, looking again at Steph, "is because I didn't want this to change how you all see Steph's achievements, because they are his, completely his. But the way they began, well, that involves a choice I made when I was 14 years old." The tension in the room was almost tangible. Now, Dell felt transported back to his own days as a professional athlete, when he anticipated decisive plays, moments that could determine the outcome of entire games. But this was different. This was about his family, his children, and secrets that apparently had shaped their lives in ways he had never imagined. "A choice?" Isha asked gently, her voice cutting through the tension. "What kind of choice, Seth?" Seth looked at her with gratitude. Isha had always been good at asking the right questions at the right moments, a skill that made difficult situations a little easier to navigate. "The kind of choice," Seth said, his voice loaded with emotion, "that an older brother makes when he realizes he has the power to completely change his younger brother's future. The kind of choice that, well, that defines the rest of our lives." He paused, looking around the table once more. "And before I tell everything, I need you all to know that I don't regret it. Not for a second. But carrying this alone for so long, it was harder than I ever imagined it would be." Steph extended his hand across the table, covering his brother's. "Seth, whatever it is, we'll face it together, like we always have." Seth smiled for the first time that night, a genuine expression that lit up his face. "Thank you, Steph. That means everything to me." The Thanksgiving dinner had transformed into something much more significant, and everyone around the table knew they were about to discover something that would redefine their understanding of the Curry family and the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. The autumn air in Charlotte carried the familiar scent of dry leaves and the promise of another basketball season. At the Curry family house on Barclay Downs Drive, the daily routine revolved around training schedules, school games, and the constant symphony of balls bouncing in the garage entrance. Seth Curry, then 14 years old, was sitting on his bed, looking through the second-floor window while watching Steph, 2 years younger but already visibly taller, practicing shots on the basket that Dell had installed at the house entrance. Even from a distance, Seth could see the natural fluidity of Steph's movement, the way the ball seemed like an extension of his hands. "That boy is special," Dell had commented a few weeks earlier, after watching Steph completely dominate a game against boys 2 years older. "He has something that can't be taught." At that time, Seth was also considered a promising talent. He played on the Myers Park High School team and had a respectable scoring average for his age. But he was beginning to realize there was a fundamental difference between being good at basketball and having that rare gift that transformed spectators into believers. The bedroom door opened and Steph entered, sweaty and radiant after the impromptu training session. "Seth, did you see those plays I practiced today?" Coach Johnson said that if I keep improving at the current pace, I can get a scholarship to any university I want. Seth smiled at his brother but felt a familiar tightness in his chest. It wasn't exactly envy. It was something more complex. It was the growing awareness that Steph was destined for something greater, and that the entire family was beginning to reorganize their priorities around this potential. "That's incredible, Steph," Seth said genuinely. "You deserve all the opportunities that come your way." A few days later, Seth received a call that would change everything. It was from Marcus Williams, a talent scout who had noticed Seth during a regional tournament a few weeks earlier. "Seth, I have an interesting proposal for you," Marcus said, his voice professional but friendly. "There's a basketball academy in Los Angeles, the Elite Performance Academy, that's offering full scholarships to promising young talents. They saw your statistics and were impressed." Seth felt his heart race. The Elite Performance Academy was known for developing players who later got full university scholarships and eventually made it to the NBA. "The program is intensive," Marcus continued. 3 years of elite training, first-class academic education, and exposure to university scouts. But there's a small problem. They only have one spot available, and they need an answer by the end of the week. "One spot?" Seth asked. "Yes, and here's the interesting part. They're also considering your brother, Steph, for the same position. Apparently, someone alerted them about his talent too." Seth felt the world stop. He knew, without any doubt, that if both were considered for the same opportunity, Steph would be chosen. The 12-year-old boy already showed signs of being a prodigy. "Can I think about it?" Seth asked. "Of course, but Seth, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for either of you." That night, during dinner, Seth observed his family. Dell was telling a story about his own NBA days, gesticulating animatedly while describing a particularly memorable play. Sonia laughed, her eyes shining with the pride she always showed when talking about her husband's achievements. Steph listened attentively, absorbing every word as if they were sacred lessons. And it was in that moment that Seth made a decision that would shape the next 19 years of his life. The next morning, he called Marcus Williams. "I'm not going to accept the spot," Seth said, his voice surprisingly firm for a 14-year-old boy. "Seth, are you sure? This is an opportunity." "I'm sure, but I'd like to make a suggestion. You should consider my brother Steph more seriously. He's special in a way I'll never be." "Seth, that's very mature of you, but—" "Marcus," Seth interrupted, "if you really want the best player, Steph is the obvious choice. I'm fine where I am." After hanging up the phone, Seth sat on his bed and allowed himself to feel the full weight of his decision. He had deliberately given up an opportunity that could have changed his life, but he was absolutely certain it was the right choice. 3 weeks later, Steph received a call from the Elite Performance Academy. The entire family celebrated as if it were a miracle. an opportunity that had emerged from nowhere that could catapult young Steph to a completely new level. Del and Sonia spent nights discussing whether it would be right to allow Steph, at 12 years old, to move to California. Eventually, they decided the opportunity was too big to waste, but that the entire family would move to support him. "It's like the universe is conspiring in Steph's favor," Sonia commented one night while packing the family's things. Seth, listening from the stairs, smiled sadly. It wasn't the universe conspiring. It was an older brother making the choice to put his younger brother's potential above his own ambitions. In the months that followed the move to California, Seth watched Steph flourish at the Elite Performance Academy. The boy who was already talented in Charlotte became truly extraordinary under the tutelage of world-class coaches. His skills were refined, his confidence grew, and his reputation began to spread through youth basketball circles. Meanwhile, Seth adapted to a new school, made new friends, and continued playing basketball, but always with the silent awareness that he had chosen a different path from the one he could have taken. The weight of this decision wasn't something he carried with bitterness. In fact, watching Steph prosper gave him deep and genuine satisfaction, but it also created a layer of complexity in his identity that he didn't know how to express to the family. How could he explain that he had deliberately redirected the course of their lives? How could he tell them that the miracle that had led Steph to the Elite Academy wasn't really a miracle, but the silent sacrifice of a brother? And as the years passed, and Steph continued to reach increasingly impressive milestones, the secret became harder to reveal. Not because Seth regretted it, but because he didn't want anyone to question whether Steph's achievements were really his. Because they were, completely. Seth had merely opened a door. Steph had walked through it with his own talent, dedication, and brilliance. But this distinction, as clear as it was to Seth, wouldn't necessarily be obvious to others. And protecting the purity of Steph's achievements had become a silent mission that Seth had carried for almost 2 decades. The final buzzer echoed through John M. Belk Arena, and Steph Curry had just scored 40 points against Gonzaga, taking Davidson to the Elite Eight for the first time in 39 years. Seth was in the stands, screaming until his voice went hoarse, watching his younger brother accomplish something that few 19-year-olds can: capture the imagination of an entire country. While Steph was carried by his teammates, Seth felt a familiar mixture of immense pride and a silent weight he had learned to carry. Around him, thousands of people celebrated as if they were witnessing something magical. And they were. But Seth knew that part of this magic had begun 4 years earlier, with a decision he had never told anyone about. "That kid's going to make it to the NBA," shouted a fan near Seth. "He's too special not to make it." Seth smiled and agreed, but felt that familiar pang of complexity. Steph was special. That had never been questionable. But the trajectory that had led him to that moment, well, that was more complicated. After the game, during the family celebration at a local restaurant, Del raised a toast. "To Steph, who shows us every day that dreams really do come true when you have talent and work hard." "To Steph," everyone repeated, raising their glasses. Seth drank and smiled, but silently added his own mental toast. "To the choices we make for the people we love." Golden State Warriors, Oracle Arena, Oakland, June 2015. Golden confetti fell from the ceiling like celebratory rain. Steph had just led the Golden State Warriors to their first NBA championship in 40 years, and Oracle Arena was in complete ecstasy. Seth was on the court, hugging his brother, feeling tears stream down his face. "We did it, man!" Steph shouted over the deafening noise. "We really did it!" Seth hugged him tighter, his voice choked with emotion. "You did it, Steph. This is yours. Completely yours." Later that night, during the family's private party, Seth found himself alone on the terrace of his parents' house in Oakland, looking at the bay illuminated by the city lights. The party continued inside. Laughter, music, and stories being told and retold about the magical season that had just ended. Sonia appeared on the terrace, bringing 2 glasses of champagne. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, offering him a glass. "You seem thoughtful for a celebration night." Seth accepted the champagne and took a small sip. "I'm fine, Mom. Just processing everything, I guess." "It's surreal, isn't it?" Sonia said, joining him in contemplating the view. "Sometimes I look at Steph and still see that 12-year-old boy who moved with us to California to chase a crazy dream." Seth almost choked on the champagne. You remember that time?" "How could I forget? It was one of the hardest decisions Dell and I ever made. Leaving Charlotte, starting a new life, all based on the hope that Steph could become something special." She paused, looking at her son. "Sometimes I wonder how our lives would have been different if that opportunity at the academy had never appeared." Seth felt his stomach tighten. "Different how?" "Well, maybe Steph never would have received the elite training that prepared him for Davidson. Maybe you would have had more opportunities to shine as a main player instead of always being in your younger brother's shadow." She touched Seth's arm, gently. "I know that couldn't have been easy for you, honey." "Mom," Seth began, but the words were lost. How could he explain that the luck that had changed their lives wasn't really luck? How could he tell her that he had silently orchestrated the redirection of the family's destiny? "Seth," Sonia continued, "I want you to know that we're equally proud of you. Your own path in basketball, your career at Duke, now in the NBA. You built something beautiful on your own." His mother's words were caring and well-intentioned, but each one added more weight to the secret Seth carried. Because the truth was that his own path had been shaped by a choice he made at 14. A choice that had indirectly defined the life course of the entire family. Portland Trail Blazers. January 2019. Seth was warming up before a game against the Sacramento Kings when he received a call from Steph. It was unusual for them to call each other before games, so Seth answered immediately. "Seth, man, did you see the news?" Steph's voice was loaded with emotion. "What news?" "Sports Illustrated just published an article about our family. They're calling us the Curry Dynasty and talking about how our rise was like an unlikely fairy tale." Seth felt his stomach sink. "Oh." They interviewed Mom and Dad, and there's a part where they talk about how it was miraculous that I received that opportunity at the Elite Performance Academy when I was a kid. Like it was destiny or something. Seth closed his eyes, leaning against the locker room wall. "Steph, and you know what's funny? I was thinking about that time, trying to remember exactly how that opportunity came up, and I can't remember the details. It seems foggy, you know?" "Sometimes memory gets confused when we're children," Seth said quickly. "Yeah, maybe. But Seth, sometimes I have this strange feeling that there are parts of our story that I don't completely understand. Like there were layers that no one ever told me about." Seth opened his eyes, looking at his reflection in the locker room mirror. 16 years. He had kept this secret for 16 years, and his brother was beginning to sense that something didn't fit perfectly. "Steph," Seth said carefully, "do you think it matters? I mean, regardless of how the opportunities came up, you're the one who did the work. You're the one who became the player you are." "Of course it matters," Steph replied. "Not because I want credit for something I didn't do, but because, man, our family has always been about honesty, about authenticity. If there are parts of our story I don't understand, I'd like to understand them." That night, Seth played one of the worst games of his career. He missed shots he would normally make in his sleep, lost simple passes, and was substituted in the third quarter. After the game, sitting alone in his car in the arena parking lot, he picked up his phone 3 times to call Steph and tell him everything. But each time, he thought about the same thing. How could he explain that he had kept this for so long without it seeming like there was something wrong with his original motivation? Dallas Mavericks, April 2022. Seth was going through one of the most difficult periods of his career. After a frustrating season in Dallas, speculation about his future in the NBA was beginning to circulate. At 31 years old, he knew his opportunities were becoming more limited. During a visit to his family in Oakland, he found Dell organizing trophies and memorabilia in the home office. There were 2 shelves, one dedicated to Dell's achievements during his own NBA career, and another, significantly larger, for Steph's accomplishments. "Dad," Seth said, entering the office, "do you have room there for a few more things?" Dell laughed. "Of course, son. Your Duke stuff is still in the box you brought last year. I can organize a section for you." 2. Seth approached the shelves, observing Steph's MVP trophies, championship photos, and other honors that told the story of an extraordinary career. "Dad," Seth said softly, "do you ever wonder how things could have been different? I mean, if circumstances had changed when we were kids?" Dell stopped organizing and looked at his son attentively. "Seth, that doesn't sound like you. You've always been the one who accepts things as they are." "I know. It's just that—" Seth paused, searching for the right words. "Sometimes I think about the choices people make and how those choices affect other people. How a small decision can change someone's entire life course." Dell approached his son, his expression concerned. "Seth, is there something specific that's bothering you?" Seth looked into his father's eyes, the same golden eyes that he and Steph had inherited, and almost told everything. Almost explained about Marcus Williams, about the Elite Performance Academy, about the ED decision a 14-year-old boy had made that had silently shaped the destiny of the entire family. But then he thought about Steph, about his achievements, about the purity of his journey as everyone understood it. He thought about the clean and inspiring narrative that the Curry family represented to millions of people. "No, Dad," Seth said finally. "I think I'm just going through a tough time with my career. Nothing I can't handle." Dell hugged him. "You know we're proud of you, no matter what happens, right?" "I know, Dad. I know." But while Seth returned the hug, he felt the familiar weight of 19 years of silence. A weight that had begun as an altruistic decision by a teenager and had transformed into something much more complex. A truth that could change how his family understood their own history, but that could also complicate the inspiring narrative they represented to the world. And as 2023 approached, Seth began to realize that the weight of this secret had become almost unbearable. Not because he regretted his original choice, but because the love and unity of his family deserved complete honesty. It was time to trust that the love they shared would be strong enough to embrace a complex truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might initially be. The silence in the dining room seemed to extend for an eternity, although it had been only a few seconds. Seth looked around the table, seeing his family's expressions, processing his words, and decided there was no turning back. "The Elite Performance Academy," Seth said, his voice now firmer, carried by the final resolution to release a secret kept for almost 2 decades. "Steph, do you remember when they called you offering that full scholarship when you were 12 years old?" Steph nodded slowly. "Of course. It was what changed everything for me." "They didn't call you first," Seth revealed, each word coming out as if it were physically difficult. "They called me." Marcus Williams, the scout who represented them, said they had a spot available and that I was the main candidate. But then he mentioned they were also considering you. Steph's expression gradually changed, going from confusion to growing understanding. "Seth, I knew," Seth continued, his words now flowing like repressed water finally released. "I knew that if they had to choose between the two of us, they would choose you. Because even at 12 years old, Steph, you were magical in a way I would never be. So I called Marcus the next day and said I wasn't interested. I told him he should focus completely on you." Sonia brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Seth, you were only 14 years old. I was 14 years old, and I saw an opportunity to do something for my younger brother," Seth said, looking directly at her. "Something that could completely change his life. And I don't regret it for a second, Mom. Not for a second." Del leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "Son, you gave up your own opportunity." "I redirected an opportunity," Seth corrected gently, "to where it could make the greatest possible impact. And look where it led us." He gestured around the table, to the gathered family, to the life they had built. "Do you think I would do it differently if I could go back in time?" Steph was silent, processing. His mind raced through memories, reconnecting events, seeing his adolescence through a new lens. "Seth, why did you never tell this?" "Because," Seth took a deep breath, "I didn't want this to change how you all see your achievements, Steph. Every title, every record, every magical moment you created, all of that is completely yours. Your talent, your dedication, your hard work. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built an empire." Steph got up from his chair and walked around the table to Seth. Without saying a word, he hugged his older brother, and Seth could feel Steph's shoulders trembling slightly. "Seth," Steph whispered, his voice choked, "you sacrificed your own dream for me when you were just a child." "It wasn't sacrifice," Seth replied, returning the hug. "It was love. It was seeing my younger brother with a gift that the world needed to witness, and making sure nothing would stand in the way of that." Isha wiped the tears from her face, her own maternal emotions being touched by the depth of fraternal love she was witnessing. "Seth, but carrying this alone for so long, it must have been unbearable at times." Seth separated from Steph, but kept his hands on his brother's shoulders. "There were difficult moments," he admitted, "especially when you all talked about how it was luck or destiny that led Steph to the academy. Or when people said our family was blessed by luck. Because I knew it wasn't luck, it was a conscious choice made out of love." Del stood up, walking to his 2 sons. His voice was hoarse with emotion when he spoke. "Seth, what you did? I don't know many grown men who would make such a selfless choice, much less a 14-year-old boy." "Dad, you and Mom taught us that family comes first," Seth said. "Always. You showed us through your own actions that sometimes love means putting others' needs before your own." Sonia joined the group, creating a family hug that included all of them. "My dear Seth," she said, her voice broken with emotion. "I'm so sorry you carried this weight alone. We should have created a space where you felt safe to share this." "No, Mom," Seth said firmly. "It wasn't about you all. It was about me wanting to protect the purity of Steph's journey. Because," he looked at Steph again, "because I wanted to make sure that when the world looked at your achievements, they saw exactly what they are. The result of an extraordinary man's work who maximized every opportunity he received." Steph wiped his eyes, his expression mixing gratitude with something that seemed like regret. "Seth, but what about your own dreams? What if you had gone to that academy? What if—" "Steph," Seth interrupted gently, "look at my life. I played at Duke University. I had a career in the NBA. I have a family I love. Do you think I'm unhappy? Do you think I have regrets?" Steph shook his head, but his expression still showed concern. "But you'll never know what could have happened if—" "And that's okay," Seth said, with a conviction that surprised even him. "Because I know exactly what happened with my choice. I saw my younger brother become one of the greatest basketball players of all time. I saw our family unite around realized dreams. I saw millions of people get inspired by your story." He paused, looking around the table at each family member. "And most importantly, I saw what true love can create when there's no ego or competition in the way." Riley, who had been quiet during the entire conversation, finally spoke with the direct honesty that only children possess. "Uncle Seth, does this mean you're the reason why Daddy is famous?" The innocent question cut through all the emotional complexity of the moment, and for a second, everyone was silent. Then Seth laughed, a genuine and liberating laugh. "No, Riley," he said, crouching down to be at eye level with the girl. "Your daddy is famous because he's incredibly talented and worked harder than anyone I know. I just made sure he had the best possible chance to show that talent to the world." Ryan, not wanting to be left out, added his own perspective. "So you're like a secret superhero?" Seth smiled, gently touching the boy's head. "No, buddy. I'm just an older brother who loves his younger brother very much." Del cleared his throat, his voice still loaded with emotion. "Seth, I want you to know something. The decision you made at 14 years old, it shaped not just Steph's life, but all of our lives. And the fact that you carried this with such grace, such humility, for so long, it fills me with a pride I don't even know how to express." "Dad," Seth began. "No, let me finish," Del continued. "You sacrificed your own opportunity, redirected the course of our entire family, and never, not once, let that create resentment or bitterness. That's not just maturity. That's the kind of character most people spend a lifetime trying to develop." Sonia nodded, her tears now flowing freely. "And the fact that you waited until now to tell us carried this weight to protect the perception of Steph's achievements. Seth, that's love at its purest level." Steph was looking at Seth with an expression that mixed admiration, gratitude, and something that seemed like reverence. "Seth, I don't know how to thank you for this. Not just for the decision you made when we were kids, but for protecting me from any complexity around it for all these years." "You don't need to thank me, Steph," Seth said. "You lived a life that completely honored that opportunity. You became not just a great player, but a great man, a great father, a great example. That That's the greatest thanks I could ask for." Isha, who had been observing the exchange between the brothers, finally spoke. "Seth, can I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why now? After all these years, why did you decide to tell this now?" Seth paused, considering the question. Because I realized our family deserves complete honesty. And because I don't want there to be secrets between us anymore, even secrets that were kept with the best intentions." He looked around the table again. "And because I finally understood that you all are strong enough to hear this story and see it for what it really is. A story about love, sacrifice, and family." Steph approached Seth again. "Brother, the next time someone asks me about how our family got where we are, I'm going to tell this story, because it doesn't diminish my achievements. It shows the kind of family that raised me, the kind of love that made everything possible." "Steph, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Steph said firmly, "because this story is about us, all of us, and I don't want you to carry this alone anymore." Del approached his two sons again. "Boys, do you know that this conversation changes everything for me?" "How so, Dad?" Seth asked. "Because now I understand that I didn't just raise two exceptional basketball players. I raised two exceptional men. One who had the character to sacrifice out of love, and another who had the grace to completely honor that sacrifice." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the tense silence of revelation. It was the contemplative silence of a family processing a profound truth about itself. Sonia broke the silence. "Seth, honey, can I make you a promise?" "Of course, Mom." "I promise that from now on, our family will be a place where truths like this can be shared without fear. Where love is strong enough to embrace complexity." Seth smiled, feeling for the first time in 19 years the complete relief of no longer carrying that weight alone. "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me." Riley, still processing the adult's conversation with the simple logic of a child, made a final observation that perfectly summarized the moment. "So, our family is even more special than I thought." Everyone laughed, the tension finally dissipating completely. "Yes, Riley," Seth said, picking up the girl. "Our family is very special, because we're able to love each other enough to make difficult choices, and we're strong enough to embrace complicated truths." That night, after the children had gone to sleep and the dishes had been washed, Steph and Seth found themselves alone on the house's terrace, looking at Oakland's lights shining in the distance. "Seth," Steph said softly, "thank you." "For what?" "For giving me the chance to have the career I had, for protecting my perception of it for all these years, and for finally trusting our family enough to share the truth." Seth smiled, feeling a weight he had carried for almost 2 decades finally dissipating completely. "Thank you for being the kind of man who completely honored that opportunity, Steph, for becoming everything I saw in you when you were 12 years old." The two brothers remained in comfortable silence, contemplating not just the city lights, but the new chapter of honesty and understanding they had opened for their family. For Seth, it was the end of a long period of protective silence and the beginning of a new phase where he could be completely himself within his own family. For Steph, it was a new understanding of the depth of love that surrounded him and a renewed appreciation for the journey that had brought him there. And for the Curry family as a whole, it was confirmation that their love was strong enough to embrace complex truths and become even more united through complete honesty. The 19-year secret had finally been revealed, not as something that divided the family, but as something that demonstrated the extraordinary depth of their love and commitment to each other.